everyone. This is Timothy Miller. He wrote the Thomas Bogue Slade book in female education in early Georgia, 1800 to 1882. I'm going to let him speak to you about his book right now.
Okay. Well, good evening, and thank you all for coming. We didn't know if we'd have one or more. So I appreciate you coming. I think it was important for me to have an event here because Thomas was from Martin County and Williamson, and the Slade family had several plantations. One of them was the Marsh Point, if you know where that is, but just up the bypass on the left, there's a Slade cemetery that's really overgrown, and it's really sad because when they built the bypass, they said it didn't qualify as a historic site, and so it's not been cared for. I think it's actually now surrounded by someone else's property, and it's overgrown. So you can go up to the trees and look in the fence and see some of the tombstones and some of the names, and yet you can't even get in there because it's so thick. But Thomas's father was at the end of the War of 1812. He was a general, and he's buried there, and so that's a pretty significant person involved in the early history of America, right here up the road. And this is where Thomas was born in the year 1800. That's why the book starts there. He was one of several children, and that's why there's so many Slades around the country. Some of them still live here, I understand. Had a difficult time making contact with the locals, but I did have a good contact with several direct descendants of this Thomas. As it turns out, the middle name, B-O-G, is pronounced a couple different ways. I think here they say Bogue, which reflects more of the French in the history. It was a maiden name for this man's mother on her side, and that's how that came into the family. But now there have been about a dozen Thomas B-O-G Slades, because down in Georgia and Florida, they say Bach. And maybe that was from the pressure of everyone saying it that way because they thought that's what it looks like, right? B-O-G. So I don't know. Both are correct, apparently, depending on where you are. But I wanted to speak a little bit about the local connection. And so I'm on page 11 here, if you have one. Henry Wickham Slade is the one who migrated from England, Dorset. I lived in England for 6 years, so I know where that is. And he married there, Hannah Loveridge, and then they migrated to Virginia. Eventually they came to Hyde County, North Carolina, and so he never lived here, but his son, they had 6 children, and one of them was Ebenezer. And so Ebenezer Slade, as far as I can tell, is the original Slade settler in what is now Martin County. And he came first, I guess it's pronounced, is it Terrell or Tyrell County?
We'll say Terrell.
Terrell. Okay, had an Uncle Terrell out, that'll help. It was the part of Terrell which is now Martin, because apparently that came from there. So Ebenezer settled there, and all of these generations had lots of children. Like Ebenezer raised 6 children here, and several of those were boys, so that made some Slade lines, right? And then one of his sons was named William, who had 5 children, and some of those were boys. And then William had Jeremiah. Jeremiah is the one they call the general, the one who's buried over here in the Slade Cemetery, and he had 9 children. And this Thomas is the 3rd child, I think 2nd son of Jeremiah. So Jeremiah stayed here, and that's why he's buried here, and some of his children. One of his children was William, and I think the Slades who are living here now are descendants of that William, which is a brother to the Thomas who left here in the 1820s, went to Georgia, married his first cousin, and then stayed there the rest of his life. And the way I came to him was because I was hired by Wesleyan College in Macon, Georgia. It's an all-girls school, and their thing is they are the first institution of higher education to give a bachelor's degree to a woman. Now they've condensed that down to first for women. but that's what that means. The first bachelor's degree given to a woman in 1830, so really early. And as it turns out, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution dug up some things about their connections to slavery back in the day, as you would expect, because it was that time. And yet they had never really come forward about those connections. And the paper was doing an expose and like, aha, we caught you. They had a brand new president there who was from Canada, and she had no idea because she wasn't aware of all of those kinds of things. And so they created a committee, and they used their historians from Wesleyan, but I guess they felt like they needed an outsider, and I was teaching an hour away at another college, so they hired me to be the outsider on that group to rewrite the history of Wesleyan College. Well, Thomas here was one of the first 4 professors of Wesleyan College back in he actually started 1829, but that was not his first school for girls. We completed the history of Wesleyan, but I got so interested in him because as I began to dig, I thought, well, surely I can get an article out of this to take to a historical conference. The librarian, who is still at Wesleyan today, said, you'll never find enough on him. That's not going to work, because they didn't know anything about him. They just knew he was there for a little better than 2 years, and then he left. And so she said, you'll never find enough. Well, I found enough for an article. I took it to the Southeastern World History Association in Florida, and apparently publishers watch the programs for these conferences. So I got a call one day from Rowan and Littlefield, which is based in Virginia, and an acquisitions editor said, do you think you can make this into a book? And of course the answer to that is always yes, whether you think you can or not. So I said yes, and spent the next 2 years finding out everything I could about Thomas. And sure enough, this is the product that came from that. That's why the book is dedicated to the librarian, because it's kind of I did find enough. But he grew up here, and there's some information in the first chapter about his growing up days. He came from a large family and spent all of that time here around Williamston and Martin County. And then because he married his cousin, he was practicing with his father. They had a legal office here. He was a lawyer as well as a general and a plantation owner, because they owned several plantations, not just the Marsh Point. That's where the house was, where the cemetery is today, but there were others. Maybe you've heard of, is it Conahoe Island? That was a plantation. Okay, and there's a few other names that you'll find in here, which are, I don't want to get wrong, but they were wealthy. They owned lots of slaves. They grew cotton and tobacco and all those things you would expect. Lots of animals, as well as other crops, food crops. And Jeremiah, the general, he was a trustee at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. He was in the state legislature as a representative and a senator, very instrumental in the creation of the county and the founding of the town. So they're not the only family, but they were one of them that were here before the creation of Martin County and then afterwards. So Thomas went down there, and his first thing was to be a lawyer. He was in Clinton, Georgia, which I was shocked to find out at one time was the 4th largest city in the state of Georgia. Back when it was Savannah, Augusta, Milledgeville, and Clinton. And now Clinton has about 12 people. So you can prosper and you can go down. It was the place to be when Thomas went there, and he was a lawyer at first. But at some point they asked him to be the headmaster of the local boys' academy. So this is how he first got into education, and he had a bunch of children, and 8 of them were girls. And at one point he wrote to his brother, who was still living here, and he said, if I'm gonna teach children, if I'm gonna teach my own children, I might as well teach other people's children. And he started the school in his home. Pretty soon he quit the boys' school and he started his own school called the Clinton Female Seminary. Now, it's not seminary we think of today, which is for training ministers, but a girls' school in the early 19th century was called a seminary. And apparently some of them still have that name. There's a few around. So Thomas started his school and girls came, and a lot of them lived in his house, but apparently everyone in Clinton was renting rooms to students. They were coming from out of state, so I think he had a really good reputation. Eventually he was elected to be the president of the very early Georgia Convention of Teachers. And this was way before public schools in Georgia. Georgia was one of the last states to really get organized for public schools. So that's why these private schools were so important. At some point, I believe, and my argument in the book is that the trustees who eventually founded Wesleyan College in Macon came to him. There is an article about a group from Macon that came, but it doesn't list their names, and so it's a difficult connection. But it looks like they contacted him first and reviewed his work and watched him and all, and then hired him and sent him up north to visit girls' schools in New York and Massachusetts so that he could get the very latest in education. And I believe that for several reasons. One, he didn't have the money to make that trip. And that's what one chapter here, The Journey North, is all about. He kept a very detailed journal. He kept a very detailed budget about all the money he spent, which is another indication he was using someone else's money. And a lot of the instruments that he bought in New York with that money are still at Wesleyan College today. There is an exhibit there you can see, and they call them Thomas Slade's instruments, scientific instruments. He was a botanist, he taught science, and I think they hired him to do that because he would have taken those instruments if they had been his. He left them there because they belonged to the college. To me, that was the real put it over the line, you know. But he eventually resigned from Wesleyan after only a couple of years, and that was a denominational dispute because Thomas was a Baptist minister in addition to being a girls' college science teacher. And when Wesleyan was founded, the trustees were very specific that it was going to be a non-sectarian school. They partnered with the Methodist Church, but they said it was always going to be open to every denomination. And so there were Presbyterian girls, there were Baptist girls, there were all kinds of girls going to Wesleyan. But they then had a president who was pressing the denominational connection a little harder, and I think there's way more to the story than is written down. I found so many letters to the editor in the newspaper. People were even using fake names to hide their identity as they were attacking each other about this controversy that raged on for more than a year. And there were a slew of people resigning in the summer of 1840. And Thomas was one of those. And so then another indicator that it had to do with sectarian controversy, he went to a place in Georgia called Penfield. And it's another small place today that was much bigger then because that's where Mercer University was founded in the beginning. And that's a Baptist college, or at least it was. They don't claim to be anymore, but it was then. And it's also where Jesse Mercer, who is the person who gave the name for that college, lived and is buried today. And so Thomas started another school for girls in that town and ran that for a few years. But then people were migrating further west. See, this also involves the Creek Indian land treaties. And so slowly, if you look at the old maps of Georgia, it's just slice by slice moving across the land. And even living in Clinton, Thomas was writing to his brother here about how that was opening up opportunities and people were moving as far west as the Chattahoochee River. And so he left Penfield and went to Columbus, Georgia, and he lived the rest of his life there. So he started another school for girls in Columbus. Eventually, some of his daughters became teachers there. His wife was also helping him, and it became probably the most successful school for girls in the whole state. at the time. And then Thomas becomes this leader in trying to organize public schools in Georgia. He was on the frontier of requiring teachers to have training and to get certification, because in those days anyone could put out a shingle and be a teacher. And he writes a lot about how he's complaining about the things he's seen and heard and the poor teaching that's going on, because there are teachers who can't even read, and he said several teachers who didn't know any more than the students they were trying to teach. But he lived until 1882, which he made him 82 years old, and he died in Columbus, Georgia. He's buried there with his family, and there are descendants of him all over. I've had help from some that live in Jacksonville, Florida. There is one lady who lives in Thailand, and she was also helpful. So that branch, I think his direct descendants have been very helpful. One is a lawyer in Atlanta. He had his own collection of papers. There's a huge collection of Slade papers at Duke University. I spent a whole week there going through about 9 boxes of documents. Strange things, like letters where the girls would put a lock of their hair, you know, to a relative, not to a boyfriend, just someone in the letter. So we would open these up, and the hair is still in the letter today. They owned a racehorse. There's documents about the horse, buying the horse, and the races it was in, and the money it won. I mean, they owned a ship that made trips from North Carolina down to the West Indies, trading goods back and forth from there. This family had ties to lots of different things, and the bulk of them did stay here in this county, but Thomas went to Georgia, and that's why there's so many Slades in other places, not just in Martin. But they do have roots here, and I thought it'd be great to come back and talk about the book where he came from. Yeah, do y'all have any questions then, rather than just anything and everything?
Why Georgia? That's a long ways from Chapel Hill.
I think there's a letter quoted here where he left, his one cousin said, to pay his respects to our cousin. So I think it was the girl. I mean, you might go to another state because of a girl. And he married her. There's a great letter where his mother wrote to his brother and said, your brother Thomas leaves us today, you know, to go to Georgia. And I think that was the last time he ever saw her. Because by the time he came back, he was on his way north on the trip, and she'd already passed away by that time. Yeah, I think because he continued to be a lawyer there, same as he was here.
Yeah.
The only difference is he married his wife. Her name is spelled Janet, but they say Jeanette. If that makes sense.
Instead of Janet.
You've seen that?
Instead of Janet, they say.
Instead of Janet, they say Jeanette. Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard that, yeah.
Yeah. And she was the Bog or the Bogue, the B-O-G. And that name got preserved. There's a dozen people named Thomas Bogg Slade. And there's that bit where I tried to sort it out in the chapter, but didn't you say you're still confused?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I told him after reading that first chapter, I thought I was half brothers to Taylor.
Well, the problem is they kept restarting. He was Thomas Bogg. He had a son named Thomas Bogg. And I say that because I'm following the Georgia people. But then they skipped a couple generations, and so when they came back again, that person was called the first, even though he wasn't. And so his son was junior, and the next one was the third. But clearly there had already been 5 in that one line. But then William, this man's brother, who stayed here, he had a son named Thomas, which they would have said Bogue, Slade. And then he's got descendants with that name. So they have numbers, but they're not in the right order. It's very confusing. That's why I was saying he's called the third, but he's really number 9.
Well, one of our sounds in North Carolina is called Bogue Sound, but it's B-O-G-E.
Ah.
Which I guess is what, French or something?
Apparently there was a little community called Sladeville at one time on the river.
There's
The
one,
picture.
Beaufort County?
there's a Sladesville near Hyde County, or in Hyde
Hyde
County,
County.
near
Okay.
Poncer,
Hyde County, yeah.
Okay,
on the way to Swan Quarter.
yeah,
I saw
There
some
is.
Hyde County mentions in
it
here.
is. His sister, I think, lived at, is it Hamilton or?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep, and, I got into like, what was their affiliation in church? Some of them were Methodist, but there were some who were members of the, I came up with Squarky Baptist Church,
Yep.
Squarky. There's some buried over there, I think. And it was interesting, because some of the slaves are buried there as well, in the same cemetery, which you don't see that often. Mhm. Thomas inherited some slaves as out of his father's will, but he let his sister have them, he said, on loan, and as if he were going to recall them later, but he never did. So, yeah, she had them the rest of their lives, well, at least until the war, right?
So the picture on the front, where is this?
This is in the Little Oak Mulgee State Park. I didn't know that they were going to do this, but the publisher called and said, did I have any photographs I wanted to use for the cover? And so I had taken 4 in this park, and I sent them 4. They picked this one. I like it because it has this dead tree in the middle, but then the path is disappearing into the woods, and you don't really know where it's going. But it's not too far from places like Macon and Clinton, just a little further south, below the gnat line.
Well, I understand that the Slade family here, the farm is a land grant farm from the
It
king.
is.
One of them was, he owned probably half a dozen plantations, and one of them was a land grant.
Yeah, Taylor's got the
I think
document.
it's the one, the Marsh Point, the one that's right out here.
Okay.
Down the highway.
You know where that one is?
Yes, it's on your, going towards that.
Good. He inherited some from his father. Some of them were left to his brother, but then I think he bought them because that brother ended up going to Alabama. And I think when he left, he must have sold them to Jeremiah. And so that's when he put those two together. He got the land grant one, and then I think he even bought some more land in addition to that. Apparently the family house was only torn down about the 1970s.
Well, it's actually 1990s.
Was it 90s?
90s, yeah.
Okay.
I have recorded some photographs of the interior, whatever that was
Wow.
left at the time. And
Should
it
have
was a
talked to you
very,
before.
very commodulous house. Had the original part was built sometime in the mid 1700s, probably mid to late 1700s, and then they did an add-on sometime probably before the Civil War. I don't know, maybe 1830, 1840, whatever the
Yeah.
front section, but it was a really nice size home and very, it fitted the type of people that they were, which
Yeah.
was, you know, agrarian, but very well-to-do and so forth.
Mhm. That may have been built then by William, Jeremiah's father, because he's the earlier generation.
It probably, I think so, yes.
Yeah. And we know he was here and a landowner as well, so.
Jeremiah had the distinction of being the person with the state that dealt with the Indian situation
Right.
over next door, so you already.
Yeah, there's some of that in here too.
Yeah, yeah.
I
I
found
haven't read your
the-
book yet, so but I just.
Okay,
Yeah.
I found the Tuscarora Treaty. There's a copy of it actually in the Duke papers,
Yeah.
where the Indians and the government signed it. And it's got the seal on it with a ribbon and all of that, so that's impressive.
Yeah, didn't last, but anyway.
Yeah.
I
There's
can't
other
remember
records.
the year that what year did he leave? Was it 1820 something, or was it?
Yeah, see, suddenly I'm drawing a blank.
That's okay.
21, 22, somewhere in there.
I've seen, I think, unless there was another brother that left at some point, there were newspaper advertisements at the time discussing his need to divest his personal property here in Martin County, and I really didn't know much about it. I knew something, a little tiny bit about him going to Georgia, but beyond that,
Yeah, I think of the boys, all of them left except for William, Jeremiah's son, because one of them ended up being basically the ambassador to Argentina, and he lived down there. Another,
Actually, it may be that, actually, it could be that person.
It
I'm
could be
thinking about,
Alfred.
rather than your, Thomas Ball.
yeah, Alfred was the oldest one.
I think it was Alfred. It was
Yeah.
like, I'm sorry, yeah.
And there are letters that do between them. But then another one became a doctor, a physician, and he was in the Mexican War and actually was killed in Mexico. He was buried in New Orleans at first, and then they moved his body to Vicksburg, Mississippi, in that national cemetery. So see, there's Slades all over the place. They've just, that one never married. But this one had, 11 children, and most of them girls. One of his sons, John Henry, was killed in the Civil War in Virginia, and didn't come back. That was when they were living in Columbus, Georgia.
I was gonna ask, did you have in these journals and letters find anything in reference to their life during the Civil War?
Yeah, because Thomas, of course, was older and he continued to teach, and that was one distinction of his school, is that he didn't close during the war. And they were involved because there are ads in the newspaper where, especially his wife, was asking local farmers to donate a bale of cotton, which they were then going to use to make blankets for soldiers, Confederate soldiers, during the war. So, yeah, they were busy, and they sent 2 boys. One of them came back. Jeremiah ended up being the mayor of Columbus. He lived in a huge Greek revival house that's still there in Columbus today. He did very well, and he's buried in the same Slade plot there with the family at Columbus. So a lot of successful people, and I think Thomas is one of the most interesting ones, because not everyone went to school in the early 19th century, especially girls. And he had a policy where he said any girl's attendance was not dependent on her ability to pay. And so he would take them as students, even if they didn't have the money. Sometimes they paid with chickens and eggs and things like that. But I think he was always poor because of that. He's always writing to people saying, please send me the $500 you owe me. And there's no indication that anybody ever sent it. But he kept going, He was a teacher all the way. His school was still going after he died.
I went to, here in North Carolina, I attended Guilford College, which is a Quaker school, and one of the presidents, his wife, decided that, women needed an education too, so she hooked up her buggy and her horse, and she went all over the countryside. But of course the fathers were not gonna let their girls off for this, but she convinced them that they didn't have to pay and so forth. She set up a system where they had a house on the campus, and the girls could do the cleaning and the cooking and all that stuff to pay their way.
Yeah.
And they did not close their school during the Civil War because they were Quakers who were pacifists and so forth. So sort of a parallel to what he's doing.
And if they're girls' schools, you don't lose as many students
True,
in the war.
true, yeah.
Like Mercer closed, but Wesleyan stayed open.
Yeah.
He there's examples in here where he tried to get certain men to send their daughters, and it's sad, but it's humorous, right? Whereas one man said that girls didn't need to know anything but cooking and cleaning, and he said, you give a girl that kind of education, he said, I won't be able to build a pig pen, she'll be telling me how to do it. But Thomas was always, he didn't want to teach things like embroidery, and this more home economic stuff. I mean, he was teaching girls Latin and classical history. They were learning Greek. They were taking the hard sciences. Girls were studying physics and chemistry and math and all of those things in the early 19th century. So I think if you were in a Slade school back in those days, you had a real advantage. And I followed up with many of those students, and it's just incredible what some of these women went on to do. I mean, one became a very famous poet at the time, and there's examples of her poetry in here. Another one married and moved to Alabama, and her husband died when she had, well, maybe it was 5, just little boys. She raised those boys by herself, but like one of them became the governor of Alabama, one of them became the president of the biggest railroad in the state, one of them moved back to Savannah, Georgia, and was head of the Cotton Exchange, and all 5 of these boys. And my argument is those boys are a reflection of their mother, because clearly the father had died. The mother raised them, and she had gone to Slade school. And so she must have been a very intelligent woman and passed that on. And you may not see it in the alumna herself, but in her children. There's several examples like that. So the effectiveness, I think, of his, and several other people would come and visit him and do a review. And so newspaper articles reflecting on what they saw when they visited his school. And I can only say for him, he went to Troy, New York. I don't know if you realize there was a really famous girls' school in Troy, New York, and the lady whose name is slipping my mind at the moment, but was well known at the time, and she wrote books about education in the early 19th century. I think she was a major inspiration from him. I think when he went there, he already had a vision, but this really opened his mind. And went on to Boston, Massachusetts, and he visited schools there. But while he was there, just the kind of reputation he had as a Baptist minister, he was invited to preach one Sunday at one of the big Baptist churches in Boston. And this was in the late 1830s, in those days. So very accomplished, I think, in 3 fields. He was a lawyer. He'd even been an inferior court judge for a while, became this educator, and then was also a very well-known, we'd call him an itinerant preacher, because he never had a church, but he traveled around, did revivals, filled in for people when they were absent, or for churches' interim work when churches were looking for someone. I don't know how he did all that. He was a very energetic man.
What denomination or was he just a generalized preacher?
Yeah, he's just a Baptist, right? Because
okay.
I guess the Southern Baptist Convention was founded in 1835.
Yeah.
And the Methodists went through a similar thing because Wesleyan was affiliated with what they called the Methodist Episcopal Church, but then they split over whether slave owners could be appointed as missionaries, and so the Southern Methodist churches became Methodist Episcopal Church South. Yeah. And so Baptists, I think, had a similar experience, but he just always said Baptist. He never made it more specific than that.
I mean, he never affiliated with a church that you know of, or anything.
Oh yeah. He that's an interesting story too, because his wife joined the church first in Clinton, and he was about 10 months later before he joined. So I don't know if he was attending with her at first, or if he just delayed that long in actually joining the church. But 2 years after he joined, they're ordaining him for the gospel ministry. So that particular church is not there anymore, but there is a church that has their records that sort of claims that legacy, but it's a little different now. But yeah, that was it's just a Baptist church. They didn't have an affiliation more than that. But yeah.
Well, when you said you rewrote Mercer's history,
Wesley's
history, so what did you rewrite?
Rewriting, not to change what was already there, but to rewrite it to include the connections to slavery and things like that. So just identifying like who gave the money, where the money came from. I mean, they're all plantation owners. That's who had the money at the time. They may be 3% of the population, but they must have had 90% of the money. You know, it was that kind of situation. And so those are the people who funded Wesleyan. And I think the president at the time wanted to just be forward about it, you know, just to say, yes, we acknowledge this. It's part of the history. Can't change it now, you know. So it was things like that. Also, Wesleyan never owned slaves, but there were professors who owned slaves that would bring slaves to the college with them, who then worked at the college. And there were other people who wanted to help the college, and they would loan their slaves to the college. Yeah, and so there are stories that the students wrote about certain ones, like a Miss Cindy who was there. They also had a man who was there even after the Civil War. Like, he stayed on because that was his job, and he was the one that opened the doors in the morning and started the fires and got the mail and did all of those things. And so just including those people in the story, because they were not part of the story before.
I wonder if being connected to the college, like they were, if they were had learned to write, since that was supposed to be illegal, wasn't it?
Oh, I know, yeah, that's.
We're allowed to do that, so it's interesting to see if these were slaves in their proximity to this campus.
Mhm.
Or-
I've never seen an example of
Yeah.
anything they wrote, but
Yeah.
it's not to say they couldn't.
Oh, I know, we don't, yeah.
Yeah.
If they did, it was clandestine, because it was against the law.
Oh, yeah. It was
Yeah.
illegal.
Even after the war.
Yeah, oh yeah, it was illegal.
Mm-hmm.
I guess he didn't live at the right time for women's suffrage.
Mm-hmm.
That would become the interest became much later.
Yeah, that really got going more in the 1880s, didn't it, and 90s? I mean, that's when the famous Susan B. Anthony and some of those were working so hard, who didn't live long enough to see the constitutional amendment, but yeah, that's the result of their work, though.
Right.
Georgia really didn't get public schools until the late 1870s. And I guess that was still in his lifetime, barely. But Georgia still gets criticized because they were so slow to do that. But it's because people didn't think government should have to pay for school. And I think that was just years of, students paying their own way to go to school. But then that meant that poor children were never gonna get an education, so, yeah.
So there was no effort at all before the Civil War to have any,
Well, there were, and Thomas was part of that, because he spoke in the state legislature a few times. Laws would be passed, and then the governor wouldn't sign them. Or one time the governor did sign the law, and the legislature never funded it. And so there was no money. The best they ever had was what they called a poor tax, and there was so much money set aside per student to each county that was supposed to be used for education, but it was such a small amount. I mean, most counties didn't even try. It is just maybe 5 counties that actually made a good effort at it, but those were county schools, they weren't state schools.
here in North Carolina, we had, what they call the literary fund, and they formalized that in 1840, and that's what started the public school system here, and that was just basically unclaimed lands that the state had, and as they sold those lands, so that money was appropriated for a division or whatever among the counties, so it was a small start, but it did, in considering, I actually didn't, I was thinking Georgia might have done a little bit more than we did, but anyway. I don't know history there, so.
They did it on the college level, so
Okay.
there are several what we
Maybe
call
that's what I'm thinking.
land grant colleges,
Yeah,
like University of Georgia. It was a land grant college. Initially, the state gave them so much land, and then they could either sell the land and take the money, or use the land and get the income. And so
Right.
that's what started UGA, 1785, I think. It's one of the oldest public universities in the country.
that would be, yeah.
Yeah.
I think that predates, our Chapel Hill campus here, I think it's.
It might.
Yeah.
All the Slade men went to Chapel Hill.
I think they
it's-
still work.
It's so interesting that they had that connection. But then Jeremiah was a trustee there, so that had a lot to do with it, I'm sure. But the girls went to other places. Thomas Thomas's wife was a graduate of what was called Salem College. Is that still a thing
Yes,
today?
still here.
Yep.
It's
I mean,
Moravian,
it's
it's a
It's a
Moravian
Moravian
school.
school.
I don't know if it's still Moravian. It was connected to, they call it Old Salem. The
Okay.
community, the Moravian community was called Salem, and they had that.
Well, she
school.
was, I'm sure, a huge influence, being an educated woman herself, you know,
Yeah.
wanting that for her
Yeah.
daughters. So, but they work together. And that's why you get this one mass of Crimson Beauty, because when they celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary, a local reporter in Columbus attended the party. And I found it interesting because he said how many people were there and how many of them were relatives. And so I ran the family tree enough to figure out who those people were, you know, based on who was living and who had died and who wasn't in the area at the time, things like that. But the conclusion of his article about their anniversary party, he said it was like one mass of crimson glory or beauty. Like the sky, the colors in the sky is what he was talking about. Was this their relationship, you know, after all that time? Any other questions?
Just one more question.
Yeah.
Does he ever mention individuals that were inspirational to his own education, people, a teacher, instructor, or whatever that he notes in his correspondence or whatever as being somebody that really influenced the person that he became
He mentioned some in letters from UNC, but the interesting thing about to your question is when he was traveling in New England, he stopped by Yale University, and he said to visit his old professor. So obviously that person had taught at Chapel Hill and had a tremendous influence on him, and he was a science teacher, and so Thomas, of course, is mostly
Well, that's
science.
kind of where I was, the science aspect, I'm glad you said that because I felt like there must have been somebody that influenced him to get into science. That was not a thing that would have been widely available around here unless you went to a university, so.
Yeah. But I guess it says a lot that that man was hired by Yale from Chapel Hill, and Thomas knew he was there, and so he went to see him when he was passing through New Haven, Connecticut. Yeah. So I know that man must have had influence on him. It's so interesting too because he went by the U.S. Military Academy and visited there, and it says that while he was there, the governor of North Carolina was also there, and they had dinner together. So he was operating at that level, you know, that he would have dinner with the governor while he's up at West Point. And then very close to there, he said he stopped by and visited with one of his former students. And so I had to try to figure out who that was, you know. Just so many trails, like we were talking about earlier. You open a door to a hallway and there's 14 more doors on that hall. You never get to the end of it, right? And the size of it was determined by the publisher because they said they wanted 100,000 words. And so you think that's a lot, but then that's where you have to cut it off. You can't include everything.
I asked an author, she's a North Carolina author, about that. I said, does a publisher, is it in your contract that you have to have so many words or something?
That's
And she
exactly
said,
right.
well, it is, but they don't hold her to it, because I was talking about how so many of our books seem to be like 300 pages, 300 some pages, the fiction books that are coming out now. And so I think she said, she said, I have no control over the cover of my book. She said a lot of.
Probably depends on the publisher for
I
that.
guess.
They would have made one up if I didn't send them that.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
I thought something from Georgia though made sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought they said you have to have at least 100,000, but then it turned out you can't have more than 100,000. And they'll give you about 10% plus or minus, but it's got to be close to that.
Well, I think writing books is fascinating. I couldn't do it for anything in the world. It is hard work. How many edits did you go through?
Several.
Yeah.
It's kind of like writing your thesis in graduate school. Because you do it in little pieces, right? Each chapter was kind of its own project, and then in the end, you just put them together. And this one fell so naturally into the places where he had lived, because each place was a different school and project and different people involved. And that was nice. What was interesting to get into was why he kept moving. And Wesleyan didn't know anything about this denominational fight they had in, 1840. And at first they were like, no, but I came up with so much, it was overwhelming. I mean, they couldn't deny it after that because they didn't want to be labeled so strictly Methodist, and yet clearly they were. They even got in trouble once because they had a revival at a local church and they were pressuring the students to make a decision and join the Methodist church. And there are letters from parents complaining that their daughters were forced to join the Methodist church and they were going to demand that they be withdrawn, unless this was reversed. And it was a huge controversy. I mean, people, town leaders of Macon, Georgia, calling each other out, in the newspaper, and it got pretty ugly.
That's interesting, I think the Methodists being a mainstream church,
Well, they were.
Yeah.
But if you're really committed to your Baptist or Presbyterian church, then you don't appreciate them hijacking your daughters.
I was thinking, and I'm not sure, that the Slades here, up in the Hampton area, somehow are connected to the Episcopal Church up there, but I may be.
Well, they may be by now. I think that's partly why the Slade papers are at Duke, because they were Episcopal, the person that donated them, which was one of his granddaughters, I think.
Oh.
She lived in Atlanta, but she gave them to Duke. There's other records at Chapel Hill, and there's a Scott College, a girls' school in Atlanta, Agnes Scott, and I think they have connections, so some records are there. They're just scattered.
Don't we have an Agnes Scott in North Carolina? Don't we have an Agnes Scott school in North Carolina?
I've never heard of it.
Oh.
Maybe you've heard of that one.
We had a Scottish settlement, and I'll have to check them out.
Sometimes you run into tragedies. His granddaughter, Helen Prescott was her name, because she was from one of his daughters. She had the original journal that he kept when he went north, and she typed up a copy of it and donated the typed copy to several archives, and then destroyed the original.
Gracious.
And that kind of stuff makes you cry, because you can't get that back now.
Well, Martha Washington destroyed all her stuff, her letters to the general and that, so.
Well, they say Michelangelo burned about half his drawings because he didn't like them.
Oh, gosh.
But even the bad ones would be worth
I
millions.
know.
He had no idea.
Oh, really?
He's like, I don't want anybody to see that.
Jeepers creepers.
All right, any other questions? I live in Dallas, Georgia now. I was at Brewton Parker, like it says on here, but I'm going to be teaching Latin this year at a classical academy up in Canton, Georgia, just north. And I think they like me because I can also teach history. They don't need me to do that this fall, but I'll probably be doing both. Some schools are pulling back from humanities and the arts, the liberal arts, and I think that's sad. So this school really focuses on, they're going to start teaching children Latin in 7th grade. And they found, because don't say it's a dead language, they found that it raises standardized test scores because it's so much a part of our vocabulary, but then it's so much a part of the terminology, say in law and science and medicine and even music. So there's a lot of good reasons to keep it around. So we're finding more and more, even elementary schools are bringing it back in some places. But it has to be people who have an appreciation for it, because too many people are getting caught up in AI and they're like, why should we teach any content at all, because you can look up anything on Google, But I believe students still need to be able to think for themselves and be creative thinkers, right? And be able to create things without just generating it with an artificial program. So I know maybe you're in a position where you can support things like that, because people are getting lazy.
Oh, yeah.
And that's not good.
Do you have plans for another book? Or-
I really don't, and I've thought about that, but I said, because people said, how did you do it? It came to me, right? I mean, I wrote the article, the publisher came to me, that's what caused it, so I don't know. I have lots of ideas, but I don't know how I would go about it, because it would be different from this one. Writing a thesis is kind of like writing a book, because that was 100,000 words, but it's on the history of science in the 17th century, and nobody wants to publish that, so.
You mentioned the editing process. Does anything come to mind that you had to put by the wayside that you wish you had included or would include if it was longer?
I hadn't thought about it. That's a good question. I tried not, I mean, because the history of education in Georgia has been written, and I tried not to get too far off in that direction. I just included the things where he was there. So I think I did enough of that, because you can get the other somewhere else. I mean, my whole argument about this was that there was so little written about him, but that he had been excluded from that history of education in Georgia. So if anything, this sort of puts him back in that story. She asked me which libraries had it. Right now, I think just like the people involved, like Wesleyan, the college where I taught, you know, Columbus State University, they have some records too, because he was in Columbus, Georgia for so long. But I don't know. I don't even know. This is for sale on Amazon and Barnes & Noble, and I have no idea how many have sold. I don't know if it's 2 or 200. I couldn't even tell you. Somebody told me once though, if you sell a serious academic history book and you sell 200, you've done pretty good. They don't sell that many, right? People don't read history.
So are you saying you're really the first to bring his name out as someone of importance to the educational history regarding Georgia? No one else has really pulled anything together about him prior? Or?
Yeah, I mean, there are no books about him. He's mentioned in a couple of history books on education in Georgia, just briefly.
Just a very brief
Very
mention,
brief,
but
yeah.
You don't get the sense that he had a lot of...
That he was a giant, you know.
And yet what you bring forth tells us that he had a great, big influence. So that's a great discovery.
That's the groundbreaking part of it, I think.
You did well.
Okay.
Thank you for the...
It's kind of like resurrecting a man from the dead. Because, I mean, I think if we could go back in a time machine, anybody in the 1830s, 40s, 50s would have, I mean, especially in Georgia, would have known his name. But, you know, no one knows him today. Maybe they will now.
Well, if you ever decide to expand on his brothers and other siblings, you have a ready audience here to...
Well, let me recommend Ancestry.com. I know you guys probably use that. Everybody does, and don't underestimate it, right? I mean, DNA test. Wow. I mean, why do I recommend it? I don't have any money involved, but they've tested so many thousand more people. They've got more people to compare it to. If you haven't taken a DNA test, you might just prepare to be surprised, right? It might not be what you're looking for, but it might be the truth.
It's an expensive Q-tip, that's what it is.
They're a lot more reasonable than they used to be.
Oh, yeah, so they're down to $39 sometimes. They'll have them on sale. And you just spit in a tube now, it's easy. I remember back in the day, you had to give some blood, but it's not like that now.
I had-
cheek and said,
Yeah.
Oh, there was that too, yes, great.
I had debated that.
Well, but
I
that's
did
just-
genome project for National Geographic.
Get the
Yeah, but I
information
thought that's an
source.
expensive Q-tip, I'm not
We
doing
bought
it.
one for my mother-in-law.
Yeah.
She wanted one for
Yeah.
Christmas one year. That's when they were $100.
Yeah.
Well, since that subject's come up, I'm gonna interject something that I was gonna do in private. I was watching an episode of Finding Your Roots on public TV, Louis Gates.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
And it was a black actor, I think, and a black actress that I'd never heard of, Sanaa Lathan. And in the course of her stuff that they were talking about, they showed a census record from Martin County, North Carolina, and it was Thomas Boggs Slade.
Oh, wow.
And that grabbed my attention immediately. Are you a Slade by chance, or?
Yeah.
Okay, anyway, and it was a Thomas Boggs Slade, and they were explaining to this black girl that she really wasn't a Lathan or something, that she was really a Slade.
Mm.
And they showed that, one of these Thomas Boggs Slade, probably wasn't this one, cause
I know, which one?
it was, I guess he was born around 1840 or 50.
Okay.
Because he had a out of wedlock child with a black woman around 1875 or 80. And this was this famous black actress's great granddaddy on her daddy's side.
Mm-hmm.
And I wrote it down, I think, I found some information in the Martin County Historical Book. It showed a picture of William and Penelope Slade.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was their son Thomas.
Yeah, William is the other son of Jeremiah.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you, was William a nephew of this Thomas Boggs?
No, he's his brother
Oh, so William is a brother
to Thomas, this
to,
one.
okay.
So it's probably his son or grandson.
So I
Because there was
guess
a string
William
of them.
named his son
Thomas
Thomas
Slade,
Boggs Slade after his brother.
after his brother. Yeah,
And that's the young man that had
okay.
the mixed race child.
Well, I have a similar story. I mean, maybe you know people like this because everyone in Georgia is related to Cherokee Indians, you know, whether they are or not, they're gonna tell you that. And I had a guy tell me one time, if half these people were related to Cherokee Indians, there would have been 10 billion of them, you know, back in the day. But we found that my great-great-grandfather was a mulatto in the census. And when I first found it, my father was like, what does that mean? And of course, we asked the archivist, and I think she was trying to be nice. She said, well, they use that sometimes for Indians because it means mixed race. And so my dad was like, yeah, that's what I always heard, you know, and he had it figured out. He was 1/16 Cherokee and all this stuff. And I was a little skeptical because he was born in Georgia, but he said his parents came from South Carolina. Later I found out they're from over, like I was telling you, Chester County, and what's the other one there? Lancaster?
No.
Yeah, that's where they were from. I think they're still in Millersville there today. But he was a mixed race guy. And of course his father owned a plantation. And I said, well, we're gonna find out. So I ran down all the descendants of this man, and there's like over 4,000 of them. And I got about 40 of my cousins, first, second, and third cousins, to take the DNA test. And at least half of them came back with some Nigerian DNA, and none of them had Native American. And yet I still have cousins to this day that want to fight me because my grandmother always said we were related to Indian, and the DNA had no reason to lie. So I think my great-great-grandfather had a plantation owner for a father, and he had a slave mother. And we may never know her name.
Well, every episode of this show that you watched, and they showed the DNA results at the end, there was this type of thing went on.
Yeah.
More than we can even imagine.
Yeah. It happens. I know someone else who found out her father was not her father.
Yeah.
When she took the DNA test, because she brought it to me and she said, you know, why am I only like this much of a match to my brother? Mm-hmm. And it looked like they were half siblings, not full. She didn't have enough markers, common markers. And so then we noticed that all their common ancestors were on her mother's side. She didn't have a single one on her father's side. And then we actually found out who the real father was. And so it leads to all kind of investigation. And maybe you don't like who you are after that, but at least you know, right? I mean, you find out the truth. And sure enough, this man was actually a politician in Nigeria, and he'd been studying at a Catholic university in Chicago. And he was there in December of 1968, right on time. And was working, I think, as a volunteer in a hospital, and her mother was working at that hospital. And already had a child with her husband and had 2 more after that, and never told anybody.
In
So
other
these-
words, the DNA does not lie.
No. Does not, just be prepared for never judgment.
So these DNA things, the best one, you do recommend, this ancestry.com?
Well, I say ancestry, like I say, only because they've tested way more people than anybody else. I'm not saying the others aren't quality and they're not good, but the more people they have in their test pool,
True.
the more specifically they can tell. So some people ask me, why do they keep changing my results? It's because they're getting better. They're getting more narrow. Before they would
People are
tell you,
taking the test.
yeah, the more people, right? Before they would have said, oh, you're from Southern England. Well, now they can tell you the village that you come from, and one day they'll tell you what house you were related to.
Yeah.
It's getting better.
well worth it. I'm obsessed with it.
Yeah. Oh,
I found some very, I could, if I was a writer, I could write several books on just what I found out.
About you yourself or your family?
My family, things, I didn't know who my grandfather was, my mom's dad. I found that out. I actually contacted a couple cousins who gave me a name, and I went to Ancestry, and I kept telling my husband, this guy has not got that name, but this is him. And it was him. They called him Bud, but his real name was John Staten.
Yeah, that's a problem, isn't it? Because what's your grandmother's name? Granny,
Right.
What's her real name? Oh, we just always call her Granny. I mean,
Oh, that was just a tip of the iceberg. It got way more interesting than that.
well, don't make your information private. The whole point of Ancestry is to share information. All my stuff is public. I've never had a problem. People get worried about your DNA result. I said, look, the government knows way more about you already. That's not a problem, right? And Ancestry will give you the option if you don't want them to share it with anybody. You can do that.
They will.
But don't make your family tree private on there.
Oh, I know, that's crazy.
Because that's no good to anybody. The whole point is we share it. Because you don't want to do research if somebody's already done it, right?
The episode of Finding Your Roots, they were doing Kira Sedgwick, who's married to Kevin Bacon.
Right.
And it was just her he was doing. And as they were starting the process, and she said, I think he asked, how are you feeling, and what do you think about this, or what do you expect to come out of this, or whatever. She said, I'm so scared that I will find out that I'm married to my cousin.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna find out at the end, he is on her tree. I mean, they had drawn him, but he's way over there, but he's on her tree.
Well, everybody's
Well,
getting
my
7
husband
degrees of
ended up
Kevin
being
Bacon.
related to me distantly, and he's from the Raleigh area.
Yeah.
And all my family's around here, so it just goes to show.
We're all related at some point.
Oh, yeah.
All right. One big family.
If you've been in America for a while, you're gonna have a connection somewhere.
We all come from out
Especially in
of
this
this.
area.
But didn't Thomas marry his first?
He
cousin?
married his first cousin.
Yeah. Which today would
It just
be-
wasn't the thing then that it is today. And I used to tell my students, because they'd be mortified, thinking they'd marry their cousin. But I said, when the houses are miles apart, and the only people you ever see that's not your sister is on Sunday at church. And those are all probably relatives, I mean, that's who you know.
I know, I had to explain
And it
it
has
too, like, it's not like now, you didn't go to dances and stuff,
Yeah.
especially in the area of my family, it was
He's
very,
of that
there's
same
in Poplar
branch,
Point
I think,
area.
from the
Yeah.
Williams.
Wow.
There's
The
hardly
Williams
any
group,
place,
yeah,
so you
yeah.
got 10 people in this family, your nearest neighbor's got 9, y'all can marry each other.
President Franklin Roosevelt. She was not a first cousin, but they were related. They were like was it a second cousin?
I think fifth.
Oh, fifth cousin.
Yeah, I watched the biography the other day, we were actually talking about that the other day. She was Teddy Roosevelt's,
There were at least a lot more
niece?
slaves.
Niece, I think, that's
Years
right.
ago, something like that.
So it's happened lots in history, even among
Well,
famous people.
the nobility, the royalty used to do it all the time.
Oh, yeah. But then you get problems.
Yeah, I was
It's,
surprised
yeah, I
at
think
the
they
children
have
that had problems.
to
marrying
me,
the first
it was
cousin.
just that.
Yeah, my students want to know, is that even legal?
Down the road from us is a state historic site called, it's, Pettigrew Plantation. Isn't that right?
Pettigrew State Park and
Crest-
Plantation is
yeah.
in the
What
park.
is the name of the plantation?
Pettigrew,
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure.
Crestwell.
Yeah, it's at Crestwell, a site manager, in Canton.
Somerset, that's right.
Somerset, I didn't think that was right. This, a site manager was working there, and it was a time of roots, you know, all,
Mm-hmm.
and so she, of course, was intrigued because she wanted to find her roots too. She was from Virginia and taken this, job down here because she knew that she was from this area originally. So she started working through the slave records and so forth there. And the sad thing about the slave records, and she found them at the courthouse, county courthouse there, is, you know, sometimes the slaves were not listed by names.
Mm.
It was just 3 males, 2 females.
Mm-hmm.
But she was able to find some names that she got that connection. So she created, it was called the Homecoming. Every year, she started contacting all these people, you know, researching their descendancy, and they came to home.
I think Oprah did a thing on it.
Did she?
I was
Wow.
there, yeah.
It was,
She was
it was
popular.
pretty
I
big.
have a genealogist who's been contacting me from California. I think I might have sent him to you, your way. I don't know if I have yet. But he's, investigating a black family,
Mhm.
and there are no records. And,
Yeah. That's sad.
Google AI said he should go to the Register of Deeds, that they were, classified as property, and he might
Yeah.
get
Yeah.
more that way.
Jeremiah's will had some names of slaves in there, and sometimes you can look at the slave schedule and just by gender and age, you can kind of figure out who's who, but that's hard work.
Mhm.
Yeah. I don't want to keep you, I can talk as long as you want, but
Oh, as long as they
if you
to
want a
say-
copy, I've got some here, and I even have a scanner there for Venmo, if you have that. But I'm selling them for $25, and that's $5 less than you'd pay on Amazon, if you want to get one.
I don't have
You mean you don't have an app that Amazon will alert you each
Well,
time book is
because-
sold?
Because the publisher gave me these and said if I sell them, I can keep the money, so that's my share. Whereas if you buy it on Amazon, that all goes to Rolling Littlefield. Well, actually, they've been bought out by, the one in London now, yeah.
Well, maybe one of these days I'll see you on C-SPAN.
Bloomsbury.
Well, I'm gonna attempt to put this one in the library.
I came intending to buy one, but I only have a credit card. I'll give it everything.
Yeah. You can use that from Amazon if you
I
want.
just go ahead and stop it. I can,
Yeah.
Yeah.